The dining room is set for a family dinner with Jake, his mother Susan, and his friend Malik. As Malik approaches, Susan's demeanor changes noticeably. Her smile fades, and her body language becomes tense. Jake notices this shift and feels a knot forming in his stomach. Malik, oblivious to Susan's discomfort, takes a seat at the table. He attempts to lighten the mood with a joke about the elaborate place settings. "I feel like I should be wearing a tuxedo for this fancy spread," he quips. His words are met with an uncomfortable silence. Susan's hostility becomes apparent when it's time to pass the dishes. As the main course reaches her, she deliberately skips over Malik, handing the plate directly to Jake. The action is so blatant that even Jake can't ignore it. Jake finds himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. He wants to say something, to correct his mother's behavior, but the words stick in his throat. He looks at Malik, seeing the hurt and confusion in his friend's eyes. Malik tries to maintain his composure, but it's clear he's affected by Susan's treatment. The tension at the table is palpable. Jake feels torn between his loyalty to Malik and his desire to avoid confrontation with his mother. He attempts to smooth things over by complimenting the food and asking Malik about his day, but his efforts feel forced and inadequate. As the meal progresses, Jake's discomfort grows. He watches Malik struggle to maintain his dignity in the face of Susan's cold hostility. The weight of the situation bears down on Jake, and he realizes that this dinner is quickly becoming a turning point in both his relationship with his mother and his friendship with Malik. As the awkward dinner continues, Jake desperately tries to steer the conversation to safer topics. He brings up recent movies and local news, anything to break the tension. However, his efforts are undermined by Susan's increasingly pointed comments. Susan begins making thinly veiled jokes with racial undertones. "I hear the crime rate is going up in certain neighborhoods," she says, glancing meaningfully at Malik. Jake winces, recognizing the implication in her words. This behavior triggers memories for Jake. He recalls past instances when Susan made similar comments, always brushing them off as harmless jokes when challenged. He remembers laughing uncomfortably, not wanting to confront the ugly truth behind her words. One particular memory stands out: a family barbecue where Susan made a disparaging remark about those people moving into the neighborhood. Jake had dismissed it at the time, telling himself she didn't really mean it that way. Now, faced with her blatant hostility towards Malik, he can no longer deny the reality of her prejudice. Malik, for his part, maintains his composure admirably. He responds to Susan's barbs with polite smiles and attempts to redirect the conversation. But Jake can see the strain in his friend's eyes, the way his shoulders tense with each thinly veiled insult. The atmosphere becomes increasingly unbearable. What should have been a pleasant dinner has turned into a minefield of racial tension and unspoken hostility. Jake feels a growing sense of shame and anger, both at his mother's behavior and at his own past complacency. As the meal nears its end, the weight of unspoken words and suppressed emotions hangs heavy in the air. Jake knows that something has to give, that this situation cannot continue without serious consequences for all involved. The breaking point comes when Malik and Jake exchange a meaningful look across the table. In that silent communication, Jake sees the pain and disappointment in his friend's eyes. Malik sets down his fork, pushes his chair back, and stands up. "I think it's best if I leave," Malik says, his voice steady but strained. "I don't want to be a burden or cause any discomfort." He begins to move towards the door, his movements deliberate and controlled. Jake jumps to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Malik, wait," he calls out, his voice cracking with emotion. "You don't have to go. Please stay." But even as he speaks, he can see the determination in Malik's stance. Malik turns back briefly, offering Jake a sad smile. "It's okay, man. I understand. We'll talk later." With those words, he continues towards the exit, his shoulders slumped but his head held high. Jake stands frozen, torn between following his friend and confronting his mother. The sound of the front door closing echoes through the house, seeming to undo the gravity of the moment. This decision point leaves Jake reeling. He feels a maelstrom of emotions: anger at his mother, shame at his own inaction, and deep sadness at the hurt caused to his friend. He He realizes that this moment will define his relationships moving forward. Jake turns back to the table, where Susan sits in stony silence. The half-eaten meal before them seems to mock the idea of family harmony. Jake knows he has a choice to make: confront the ugliness that has been revealed or continue to pretend it doesn't exist. As he looks at his mother, Jake feels a surge of determination. He can no longer ignore or excuse her behavior. The time has come for a difficult but necessary conversation, one that will challenge long-held beliefs and potentially change their relationship forever. Jake turns to face his mother, his heart pounding in his chest. "Mom," he says, his voice tight with emotion. "What was that about? Why did you treat Malik that way?" Susan avoids eye contact, busying herself with clearing the table. "I don't know what you mean," she replies defensively. "I was just being cautious. You can't be too careful these days." Jake presses on, his frustration growing. "Cautious about what, exactly? Malik is my friend. He's never given you any reason not to trust him." Susan's movements become more agitated. "You don't understand, Jake. People like that, they're different. They have different values, different ways of doing things." "People like what, Mom?" Jake challenges, his voice rising. "Black people? Is that what you're saying?" Susan flinches at the direct accusation. "I'm just trying to protect you," she insists. "You don't know what they're really like." Jake takes a deep breath, trying to control his anger. He begins to recount stories Malik has shared with him, incidents of discrimination, microaggressions, and outright racism that his friend has faced throughout his life. As Jake speaks, Susan's expression shifts from defensiveness to discomfort. She tries to interrupt, to offer justifications, but Jake presses on, determined to make her understand the impact of her actions. "Do you have any idea how it feels to be constantly judged, to be seen as a threat just because of the color of your skin?" Jake asks, his voice cracking with emotion. "Malik has faced that his entire life, and tonight, in our home, you made him feel that way again." Susan falls silent, the weight of Jake's words sinking in. For the first time, she seems to be truly listening, her certainty shaken by her son's passionate defense of his friend. The tension in the room reaches a boiling point. Jake's voice rises as he continues to challenge his mother's beliefs. "How can you justify treating someone like that? Malik has been nothing but kind and respectful, and you couldn't even pass him the food." Susan's face flushes with a mix of anger and shame. "You don't understand," she shouts back. "I've always tried to protect you. The world isn't as simple as you think it is." Jake is taken aback by the raw emotion in his mother's voice. "Protect me from what? From having friends who are different from us? From experiencing other cultures?" Tears begin to form in Susan's eyes. "From getting hurt," she says, her voice breaking. "From being taken advantage of. You don't know what people are capable of." Jake stares at his mother, suddenly seeing her in a new light. He realizes that her prejudice isn't just about race. It's rooted in fear and insecurity. "Mom," he says, his voice softening slightly, "has someone hurt you? Is that why you're so afraid?" Susan's silence speaks volumes. Jake continues, "But can't you see that by pushing people away, by judging them before you even know them, you're the one hurting people? You're hurting me, and you hurt Malik tonight." The room falls quiet as Susan absorbs Jake's words. The weight of years of unspoken fears and prejudices hangs heavy in the air. Jake feels a mix of anger, sadness, and a newfound understanding of his mother's motivations. "I never meant to hurt anyone," Susan says softly, her defenses crumbling. I don't know how to change. I've always thought this way." Jake takes a deep breath, realizing that this moment could be a turning point. "It's not too late to learn, Mom, but you have to want to change. For me, for yourself, and for people like Malik who deserve better." A heavy silence falls over the room as Susan processes Jake's words. She sits down heavily, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Jake watches her, his own anger giving way to a mix of hope and apprehension. After what seems like an eternity, Susan speaks. "I never thought about it that way," she says quietly. "I always believed I was doing the right thing, protecting our family. But hearing you speak about Malik, about what he's been through, I feel ashamed." Jake feels a glimmer of hope at his mother's words. "It's not too late to change, Mom. We can work on this together." Susan looks up at Jake, tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to start," she admits. Jake takes a deep breath. "The first step is acknowledging that there's a problem, and you've done that. The next step is to educate yourself, to try to understand perspectives different from your own." As they talk, Jake feels the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He thinks of Malik, of the hurt in his friend's eyes as he left. "I need to find Malik," he says suddenly. "I need to apologize, to make sure he's okay." Susan nods, looking both relieved and apprehensive. "Go," she says, "and tell him I'm sorry too. If he's willing, I'd like a chance to apologize properly." Jake stands, torn between staying to continue this important conversation with his mother and going to find his friend. But he knows that right now, Malik needs him more. "We'll talk more when I get back," Jake promises. With that, he heads for the door, determined to make things right with Malik and to begin the process of healing and change within his family. Jake steps out into the cool night air, his mind racing. He spots Malik sitting on a nearby bench, hunched over with his head in his hands. Jake approaches cautiously, his heart heavy with guilt and concern. "Malik," Jake calls softly. Malik looks up, his expression a mix of hurt and resignation. Jake sits down next to him, leaving a respectful distance between them. "I'm so sorry," Jake begins, his voice thick with emotion. "What happened in there? That's not okay. It's not who I am, and it's not who I want my family to be." Malik is quiet for a moment before responding. "I know it's not you, Jake, but man, do you know how many times I've been in situations like that? How many times I've had to smile and pretend it doesn't hurt when people look at me like I don't belong." Jake listens, feeling a deep sense of shame. "I can't imagine how that feels," he admits, "but I want to understand. I want to do better." Malik nods slowly. "It's exhausting, you know? Always having to prove yourself, always being aware of how people might perceive you. Tonight, it just hit harder because I thought your family would be different." Jake reaches out, hesitating before placing a hand on Malik's shoulder. "I'm going to make this right," he promises. "My mom, she's got a lot to learn, but she's willing to try. And I'm going to do everything I can to educate myself and be a better ally." Malik looks at Jake, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "That means a lot, man. It's not easy to confront your own family about this stuff." As they talk, Jake feels their friendship deepening. He realizes that this painful experience has opened his eyes to realities he had been blind to before. He's determined to use this as a catalyst for change, both in himself and in his family. As Jake and Malik continue their conversation, they begin to discuss ways to move forward. Jake is eager to turn this negative experience into something positive. "I've been thinking," Jake says, "maybe we could start a diversity awareness group at school. Something to help people understand and appreciate different cultures and experiences." Malik nods thoughtfully. "That could be good. But it's important that it's not just talk, you know? We need to focus on real actions, real changes." Jake agrees enthusiastically. "Absolutely. We could organize events, bring in speakers, maybe even set up a mentorship program for kids from different backgrounds." As they brainstorm ideas, Jake and Malik find their excitement growing. They begin to see this difficult evening as a turning point, an opportunity to make a real difference in their community. "You know," Malik says after a while, "maybe we should go back and talk to your mom. If she's really willing to learn and change, that could be a powerful thing." Jake hesitates, torn between his desire to protect Malik from further hurt and the hope that real progress could be made. "Are you sure? I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position again." Malik takes a deep breath. "It won't be easy, but if we want things to change, we have to be willing to have those difficult conversations. And it sounds like your mom might be ready to listen." Jake feels a surge of admiration for his friend's courage and wisdom. "Okay," he agrees. "Let's do it. Together." As they stand to head back to the house, Jake and Malik share a look of determination. They know the road ahead won't be easy, but they're committed to facing it side by side, united in their goal of creating understanding and change. Jake and Malik approach the house, both feeling a mix of apprehension and determination. As they enter, they find Susan sitting alone in the living room, her eyes red from crying. She looks up as they enter, surprise and shame crossing her face. Jake clears his throat. "Mom, I'd like you to meet Malik. Properly this time." His voice is firm but gentle, giving Susan a chance to make things right. Susan stands slowly, her movements hesitant. "Malik," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. I owe you an apology. My behavior was inexcusable." Malik steps forward, his posture tense but open. "Mrs. Johnson, I appreciate your apology. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." Susan nods, tears welling up in her eyes. "I've been so foolish, so closed-minded. I let fear and ignorance guide my actions, and I hurt you in the process. I'm truly sorry." The tension in the room is palpable as Malik considers Susan's words. After a moment, he extends his hand. "Thank you for saying that. I hope this can be a new beginning for all of us." Susan takes Malik's hand, her grip firm and sincere. "I'd like that very much. And, if you're willing, I'd like to learn. To understand your experiences, to do better." Jake watches this exchange with a mixture of relief and hope. He knows this is just the first step on a long journey, but it's a crucial one. "Why don't we all sit down?" Jake suggests. "We have a lot to talk about, and I think this could be the start of something important." As they move to the living room, the atmosphere shifts. There's still tension, still hurt to be addressed, but there's also a sense of possibility, of bridges being built where walls once stood. Susan, Jake, and Malik settle into the living room, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Susan takes a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Malik," she begins, her voice trembling slightly, "I want you to know that you are always welcome here. I promise to work on my prejudices and to treat you with the respect you deserve." Malik nods, his expression guarded but open. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Johnson. It's not easy to confront our biases, but it's necessary if we want to create a better world." Jake looks between his mother and his friend, feeling a surge of pride and hope. "Maybe we could start by sharing our experiences," he suggests. "Mom, you could listen to some of the challenges Malik has faced. And Malik, if you're comfortable, maybe you could help us understand how we can be better allies." The conversation that follows is raw and emotional. Malik shares stories of discrimination he's faced, from subtle microaggressions to more overt acts of racism. Susan listens, her face a mix of shock and growing understanding. As the night wears on, tears are shed, apologies are made, and a new understanding begins to form. Susan asks questions, eager to learn and correct her misconceptions.